Hello, everyone, and welcome to our TRiiBE Tuesday panel. If you're new to TRiiBE Tuesday, this is our monthly panel series where we invite community leaders, public officials, and experts to join us to discuss current events in our community. This month, we present to you our TRiiBE Tuesday Traditions Lost, Traditions Created panel, moderated by the TRiiBE co founder, Morgan Johnson.
Hey everyone, hey to the TRiiBE family. Again, I'm co-founder of the TRiiBE and we just celebrated our 4th anniversary. I'm so grateful that we've made it to 4 years. And it's been a journey. So if you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you share this page. I see Quinn is out there watching. Hi, Quinn. Definitely share and let people know that we are live and talking about Black traditions, how they're passed on, those that we've lost and those that we have maintained. So let's get it started. Thank you so much for that introduction. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. First up, I have LaCreshia Birts. She is a Chicago native and community organizer. Her work centers on restorative and economic justice for Black Americans. In 2019, she co-founded the Black Remembrance Project and initiated a citywide campaign to get Juneteenth recognized as an official holiday. In addition to coordinating local Juneteenth efforts, LaCreshia volunteers with Black groups fighting for reparations for descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. Welcome, LaCreshia, to TRiiBE Tuesday. Next, we have Mr. Rami, who is a film producer, director, and historian. He's also a member of the board of the Illinois Art Council, a member of the Luminary Board of the Independent Film Alliance, and former Director of Education and Public Programs for the DuSable Museum of African American History from 2011 through 2016. Mr. Rami produced the feature film Of Boys and Men, released by Warner Brothers, starring Angela Bassett and Robert Townsend, and 93 Days in Nigeria, starring Danny Glover, currently airing on Netflix and Amazon Prime. Yes, get that plug in, for which he was nominated for an African Academy Award and an African People's Choice Award. In 2019, Mr. Rami was selected for inclusion in the History Makers Digital Archive, housed at the Library of Congress. We are so honored to have you here, Mr. Rami. And last but certainly not least, we have Professor Shontoria Pratt, who is a historian and educator. They were born and raised in Chicago and currently educating in the city of Chicago as a professor of African American Studies at Malcolm X College, and 9th, 10th, 12th grade history teacher at Urban Prep Academy at the Inglewood campus. Professor Shontoria received her BA in African American Studies from Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and a whole bunch of accolades under here, including a PhD in education. Thank you so much, Professor Pratt, for joining us. All right, y'all. I love when the chat is lively down there. Keep it up. Okay, so traditions. I really wanted to bring the TRiiBE family together during Black History Month to talk about traditions, because I was always that kid who asked a lot of questions. I was at my grandmama's house, wanting to know where she came from. And so I guess I always had that thirst as a storyteller to want to hear stories and to want to learn, to want to carry on traditions. And for me specifically, I came up in a lot of predominantly white institutions on the North Shore of Chicago, where a lot of the kids that I went to school with were wealthy, and they had so many artifacts, so many heirlooms that were passed down through their families. And I noticed that I didn't really have many, so growing up and seeing people with artifacts from, you know, things like the Civil War and stuff like that, I had so many questions about what was missing. And I began to ask my parents, my father, questions, you know, who was your great grandmother? Who was this? Who was that? And I realized that our family tree was extremely broken. You know, my dad couldn't tell me the name of his grandmother even. And so I even traveled to Mississippi with co-founder of the tribe, who's also my best friend, Tiffany Walden. And we went on an exploration through a cemetery. We realized that, you know, our families, even though I'm from the north suburbs of Chicago and she's from North Lawndale, our families are from like this same little area in Mississippi. You know, like, of course, so many people from Chicago like migrated from the same area in Mississippi. And we learned that a lot of the history was wrapped into the church and the church cemetery and things like that. And I'm still looking to put those pieces together. But I want to ask you first about what you all do in oral traditions. Like, who are the storytellers in your family? For me, I look to my grandmother and she would always tell me I asked too many questions. She wasn't trying to tell me stories. So I have a lot of holes in my history. But please, Mr. Rami, tell me about what you do and who is the storyteller in your life, in your family?
Well, first of all, congratulations on the work that you're doing in your 4 years. It is,
thank you.
It is wonderful to have a voice that is continuing to tell our stories. I appreciate the fact that I'm here. In terms of the direct answer to your question, though, I want to shift back to sort of an origin story. So when I was growing up, I lived in Stateway Gardens, which was a housing project. And when I lived in Stateway, we would be playing basketball. So every time we would either play basketball or baseball, this guy would drive up on us. I believe he had the first mobile museum, but he would do it like a historic drive-by. His name was Hammurabi Rob. And if you look him up, he has an extensive history. As a matter of fact, he founded the House of Knowledge, which was at the what ultimately became the DuSable Museum. So he had a space there that dealt with historic artifacts. But he would force us to stop playing baseball or basketball, and he would take us to his van, and he would show us all of these historic pictures and all of these Black books, and he would inundate us on a continuous basis. Then he took us to the DuSable Museum, which was around the corner from me, and he took us to the Southside Community Arts Center, which was across the street from the DuSable. So I happened to have grown up in an area that was rich in cultural history. Now, my mother, she graduated from DuSable High School. So I was always tuned into what DuSable represented. And then I went to Wendell Phillips. And so I have on there alumni t-shirt, helping to push that. And I went to Wendell Phillips, which was named after an abolitionist. So all of that was wrapped up in my ability to learn history. And then finally, my wife and I, some years ago, decided that I would visit the majority of my eldest living relatives. And I took a scanner and I went to their house and a camera, and I took pictures of everything from baptismal records to the family cookbook to all the pictures on the wall. So I am the repository of the history of my family.
I would say the same. I am the archivist. I'm the person who has all the pictures. I have the recordings of, you know, my grandfather founded the church that I belong to, and I'm the person who bugs all the elders of the church, like, what you got in your house? Like, let me get my hands on it. You know, I'm that person in my family as well. Professor Pratt, welcome. I'm interested in your work in oral traditions, and who was the storyteller in your orbit?
It's so funny you say that. I literally just text my mom, like, Mom, jump on. They're talking about you. First off, hello. I'm very, very excited to be here. In my family, I actually got all of my heritage and like how I pass that on into my work, into my students from my mother. Definitely, I was very blessed to be birthed by someone who knows how to tell a story with so much detail that you feel like you're there. And my mother was also blessed enough to be raised by her grandmother, who was raised by her grandmother. So my mother has a lot of cultural roots. On both sides of my family, we're from Mississippi. I spent a lot of time down in Mississippi. Most of my childhood, summer times, was actually down there, and we still have the same land that we had for when our family was enslaved on plantations. And that's not a flex, but it's definitely something that was the first type of opening of how I got to understand my culture and heritage as a Black woman in this country. So if I had to equate anyone with being a storyteller in my family, anyone who is actively keeping up with our history and our heritage is definitely my mother. So shout out to you, Mom, if you're here. And I just pass that on. That's something that I do now actively with my students. I've done it in some of my graduate research. And it's something that I'll continue to do because our legacy is not always it's never going to be truly celebrated in our history books, in the society that we live in, because it was not made for us. So if we are not actively telling these stories, they're never going to get told. And I realized that very early on, and I'll continue to do so into my own children.
LaCreshia, jump on in. Tell us about your work as it relates to oral storytelling, and who was the storyteller in your orbit, in your family?
Okay, I'll start off by talking about the storytellers in my own family. So my grandmother, who has passed on, she was a very essential storyteller in my family, and she collected albums. She used to have this big collection of obituaries from like not just family, but like, you know, close friends in the family. And it was a huge collection. I don't know where that collection is right now, but now I want to get my hands on it after hearing about Mr. Rami's archivist tales. But she told a lot of stories about like her upbringing, how she was raised. My family has been in Chicago for over 100 years. And I was always a curious child, but I went to a charter school called Perspectives Charter School, and they had us do a passages project is what they called it. And they forced us to dig up our family history to as far back as we could go. And so I was able to trace my family roots to Tennessee and Mississippi, where my great grandmother is from. And she came here to Chicago at a very young age and was orphaned by her aunt because something happened to her parents. So there's a huge chunk of my family's history that is missing because of how my great grandmother got here. But in terms of my other orbit, I've been very privileged to sit around and learn about history from Chicago activists such as Frank Chapman. Frank Chapman is the lead organizer for the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And he's told organizing stories about, you know, not like organizing from within the prison, organizing during like the Black Power movement. So I've been just very privileged to just hear from other people outside of my immediate family who've just told me about what life has been like for Black people across the decades. In the work with the Black Remembrance Project, our group has kind of tasked ourselves with telling the story of Black people collectively in the Chicago area. And we did an event that sort of highlighted the Chicago race riot anniversary back in 2019. Because I hadn't even learned about the Chicago race riot growing up. It wasn't taught in my classes as a student in CPS. And my family didn't talk about the Chicago race riot either, even though they were most likely here during that time. So we have been trying to unearth these stories of things that happened in Chicago history, including the assassination of Fred Hampton. You know, 2019 also marked the 50th anniversary of his unfortunate death. And that's when our organization got started. We started to kind of highlight these big anniversaries and pivotal moments in Black history, including the 400-year anniversary of Black people in the United States was also in 2019.
Thank you so much, LaCreshia. Professor Pratt, I'm not sure how much you can speak to this, but can you tell us a little bit about why oral traditions are so important? Like, where do they come from and why have they survived?
Absolutely. We're going to use this degree today, huh? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's actually funny that you spoke about this. I actually did part of my graduate research looking at the Chicago race riots. And there's so much history there. I don't remember too much, but I can speak a little bit to it. But jumping back into oral history, it's important because it is something we can directly link to the African diaspora, right? We can think about how storytellers were to the Middle Passage, how important they were to us gaining freedom, and how important they were for us to build the society that we have today as Black people in this country. And it is also something that can directly link us to other parts of the world. A lot of, we have to think even further back to the idea that, slaves were not allowed to learn how to read. And all of our communication, for the most part, was either in secret or through song. And that oral history can be passed in so many different ways, which makes it one of like the richest forms of communication that we can have in our present, in our ancestral life, and in our current life. So just to wrap it up, again, oral history speaks to a lot of the cultural norms that were set in our current society and how they have been impacted by our history. If you have people who understand the importance of passing on oral traditions, you'll never lose the richness of your own culture within your family and even in the broader scope. And it's also something that directly links all of us together as people of the African diaspora. So.
Oh, when I'm talking and y'all can't hear me, you gotta let me know. Okay. You gotta let me know, Mr. Rami. I'm thinking about the tradition of storytelling as it pertains to film, and a lot of times, like even like blaxploitation and stuff like that has picked up on this idea of like telling lies. Like I'm thinking of the Dolomite film. Have you seen that film?
I have. You talk about the one with Eddie Murphy or the original?
Yeah, the one with Eddie Murphy. Where
both of them. I saw the original as well.
I saw the original too. Yeah.
And I also had a chance to work with Rudy Ray Moore. Okay, that's another question. That's another conversation.
I mean, we're talking about oral tradition, so if you want to give us a really quick story about Rudy Ray.
But what I want to do first, though, is sort of challenge the notion of oral tradition.
Okay.
Because when we talk about that, we're talking about it from a perspective of when we were stopped in terms of our ability to communicate versus the fact that historically we communicated and we did have language and we did write. We gave word to the world. We gave language to the world. And so when you look back at African society, there are tons of books, but we have been taught that we were oral and as a result have not been pushed into looking at the rich amount of material that's available to us, whether it's plays that were written in the 1800s or the books that are still languishing in Timbuktu, or what was written on the pyramids. So we have been communicating for a long period of time. During slavery, however, we were forced to not be able to read because, some of your listeners may know, to be free, all you needed was a note. And so if you could read and write, you could write your own note because most of the people that were writing them, didn't have the educational level that would distinguish them from anybody else. So what I have attempted to do since the beginning of my work, whether it was in theater, which we created theaters after the death of Malcolm X, we began to move towards the development of a more specific Black arts movement, where we started to write about ourselves rather than languish in having to take other people's history and replay it. We began to look at the construction of art and images and change the way we feel about ourselves. And that still continues today. The biggest tragedy I think that we have as a people is the fact that we don't necessarily market ourselves well enough. We don't know what we do. And there are a lot of us. There are a lot, which is why I have such great hope for millennials. There are so many people that are coming up that are doing incredible work, but we have either ignored it because the media has not been in the forefront of being able to tell those stories, or because we look for other people to define who our masters are, who our great folks are. And we have to be in the position to be able to do that. So when you look at the development of Ebony Magazine, when you look at the development of Jet Magazine or the TRiiBE, they were hopefully constructed to give visions of ourselves and give us a way and a path to understand who we needed to be and what we should be moving towards to create our collective freedom. I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we see the TRiiBE as a continuation of that revolutionary tradition of, Black narratives and telling stories and creating that vision of ourselves. I did wanted to ask you still to tell that story about Rudy Ray Moore.
Okay, so in the early 70s, I was doing casting for films. I had done Blues Brothers, Cooley High, Mahogany, and a series of those films. So I get a call, and I was told that there was a film coming to town that was going to star James Earl Jones and Lou Gossett, and it was called Monkey Hustle. But when they got to town, it was Rudy Ray Moore and Yaphet Kotto that was starring in the film. That's one of the, and I've done, I think, 16 films. That movie is one of the few that I would consider to be a Blaxploitation film. Because there are too many of them that we can't put into that or allow people to define us and what we are. But too many times we have allowed people to say, The Spook Who Sat by the Door is an exploitation film. How is that even possible to say that? How do you define it? Because for it to be exploitive, what it meant during the period of time we were doing them was that white producers were coming in. They weren't paying people right. They were writing the stories. They weren't giving them a budget. They were producing it, and they were hiring, some actors that they would throw in. But when you get to Thomasine and Bushrod, and you get to the work of Gordon Parks, when you get to the work of a number of these people, these were not exploitative films. They were funded by Black folks. They were produced by Black folks. They were directed by Black people. Shouldn't be in that category. Okay.
Got you. Okay, so I want to move on away from oral traditions. Thank you so much for what you all have offered so far. I want to talk about religious traditions and rituals and holidays. LaCreshia, tell us about your work with Juneteenth and why it's so important for us to have this as a national holiday.
Okay, so when it comes to Juneteenth, I thought it was very important for us to uplift it as a holiday for the very reason that Mr. Rami pointed out in terms of Black people not marketing ourselves. Juneteenth was not a holiday that I knew about growing up. I actually learned about Juneteenth from the Let Us Breathe Collective, which is an organizing group here in Chicago, who had hosted, I think it was called Freedom Day. They hosted an event in Douglas Park in honor of Rakia Boyd and the work that we were doing around police brutality for high school students in that area. And it was my first acclimation to Juneteenth. And when I learned about it, I was a little upset. I'm like, why didn't I learn about this holiday in school? Why didn't my family tell me about this holiday? How could I not know about this important day? And I think it's because there's a lot of, one, my family has been in Chicago for a long time, like I said, over 100 years. And I think that there are some traditions that are in the southern region of America that gets lost when you migrate to the north. But also, I think that a lot of folks depend on educators. So, they're the history teachers to teach history and, about the Black experience in this country. And there are a lot of things that have gotten lost. Like I said, I didn't learn about the Chicago race riots. I didn't learn about Fred Hampton in school, I didn't learn about Juneteenth. And so I thought that as an organizer in the city, that, and a person who also studied Black history as well, that it was my obligation to share this history with the broader public. And it also didn't make any sense to me that Juneteenth wasn't a holiday. I mean, we celebrate the 4th of July, which is supposed to be this country's independence, but Black people were not freed, during our Independence Day. So, Juneteenth is actually a day that allows all of us to celebrate freedom. And I thought that, more people should know about that holiday. And I wanted to market like our culture. And I don't even like the word market because it makes it seem like it's something to be commodified or commercialized. And I think that that's a definite problem in the Black community. We have so much of our community that, like our culture, our music, our arts, that's kind of, for sale. But what do we do within our own internal community? How are we celebrating our culture and being proud of our culture amongst each other? And I felt like Juneteenth was an opportunity for us to come together and celebrate our Blackness together.
Professor Pratt, this movement to make Juneteenth a holiday, or to create our own, quote unquote, Black holiday, that's not like a new idea. There's been plenty of times throughout history where we've kind of carved out our own thing, whether it's through our own national song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, or the Pan-African flag. Everybody who's watching the black, red, and green flag. Can you talk a little bit about those historical movements? Why do these types of things spring up with Black people? Why do we feel like we need to have our own?
Yeah, I can give some context. I do want to point out it wasn't necessarily my specialty, so I won't have a lot of facts and figures, but I can speak on some of the things that I've seen in passing within like the scholarship range. If you think about the calendar year that we have, and I'm looking at my calendar here. If you think about the calendar that we are given every year, you can see countless holidays that we don't understand, that don't celebrate us. Columbus Day, right? And this continuation of pushing forward the oppression that we still are, succumbing to today, right? So the importance of pushing forward Juneteenth as a national holiday, Black History Month, right? These things are breaking that cycle. So if you don't create these moments in time where we can celebrate our history and recognize our own heritage and culture, it continues to erase us as a culture and as a people. And just overall is honestly a disrespect to our own ancestors because of the fight that they did to get us where we are today. A lot of why oppression and institutions are successful is because of the erasure of the oppressed. And if you take away that erasure and you make people more aware, and I can even speak to this as an educator, right? The education system in itself is an institution that feeds on the erasure I'm trying to select the right word here, but think about the school to prison pipeline. It oppresses certain groups of people, certain groups of students. And this is all done because of erasure. So if you take away that margin and make the known more popular, you can't oppress someone who's seen, right? You can't oppress someone who is truly celebrating themselves on a larger scale. So that's some of the reasons why a lot of these movements that we see, whether they're successful or not, just those stamps in time are so important.
Just a couple of comments. Originally, Birth of a Nation, the movie, came out in 1915. And it was a movie that was designed to create as many negative images of Black people as possible and to create and recruit members for the KKK. So following that and its impact, it was played at the White House. It had some devastating impact in terms of the number of people that were lynched and so forth. Following that, in 1920, Marcus Garvey in the UNA gave us the red, black, and green flag, because Garvey's philosophy was that any people that were going to be a constructive people had to have a flag. They had to have a nation. They had to have those things that were good for them. Okay, so then if you push forward, Juneteenth was a celebration of when people under slavery in Texas were notified that they were free. I mean, think about it. There was no YouTube, there was no Facebook, and the owner of these plantations weren't going to go out and say, y'all free, So how are they going to learn about that process? So yes, Juneteenth is a celebration of our freedom. Now, let me also say that everybody has the right to create any type of holiday that they want to create, because all of them are made up, every last one of them that any of us celebrates. And so what I participated in more than religion is Kwanzaa, and I've participated in Kwanzaa since 1969. It's a non-religious holiday. It is based around the celebration of us. It is based around the construction of bringing and restoring our traditional greatness. And so I have the tendency to go there, because if you look at religion in general, we have to look at how does it free us? And as a people, if we're involved in something that is not freeing us, that is not sustaining our ability to grow, then why are we doing it? Professor, you talked about about education. What's the purpose of education? Why are we educating people? Why are we sending them to school? If we're going to send our kids to school and then they're going to go away and make no commitment to the restoration and construction of our communities, then what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Okay, so two other things. And I just want to show these. This is the curriculum that we developed while I was at the DuSable Museum for the State Board of Education. It deals with the African-American History Project. This one was developed for CPS. It has over 250 lessons dealing with African and African-American history. It is currently available to every teacher in the city of Chicago. Are they using it? That's another question. But the material is there. A young person said to me once, we didn't leave them a roadmap. I was talking to a young millennial, and I said, we left you books. We didn't have them. Black books were not in the abundance that they are now. We left the roadmap. You got to read it. Okay.
Millennials, you hearing them? You hearing them? They saying preach. They saying preach. I think that's real. All right, I want to move on. So since we're talking about religion, I was sharing with you all before we went live that I've been watching the Black Church documentary. Those of you watching, if you're watching the Black Church on PBS, let us know. I'm interested in religion and rituals and how they how they pass on traditions and also sometimes erase traditions. I've been in particular interested in Christianity here in the States. And for me, there's a little bit of confusion as to what parts of Christianity were inherited from the ancestors, what parts from this system of slavery. Okay, so I want to give an example. The ushers in the church, they wear the white gloves. Some of them still do. I grew up Baptist. Some put their hands behind their back. So that is a tradition that is inherited from slavery as a way to keep the slaves from stealing, apparently. Can y'all see me? Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I was talking about the ushers in the Black church, how many of them wore the white gloves in the church and put their hand behind their back in the white church, and how that is a tradition that is a continuation from slavery. So I know that we take so much pride in the Black church and so much identity from the Black church, but how do we start to filter those parts that were oppressive? How can we tell the difference? Can any one of you speak to this? Professor Pratt, go ahead.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm actually teaching my students right now in the class I'm teaching for Malcolm X. We're talking about, or we're going to begin talking about the Black church and how it started the idea of Black culture, celebrating Black culture on like a consistent basis. I'll just answer your question directly, not to take up too much time. The way that we can begin to shift, because we have to think about the history, right? Christianity, from all the documents that we have, was given to us by our oppressors, right? It was not something that we decided, oh, this looks nice and shiny, we're going to pick this up and take it as our own. We were forced to have this, right? And as a forced religion that has been passed on through generations, right? It's such a gray area between what is faith, what is for to feed our spiritual selves, but then what is also continuing the oppression because of who gave it to us, right? So the way that I think that we could begin to kind of shift that margin is we have to understand, we have to actually start digging into what is religion in itself, rather whatever you're speaking to. What oppressive natures is that religion pushing on, right? What type of ways am I in celebrating this, in being this type of religion, whatever it is? How is it enforcing oppression on other people, especially people who look like me? And I think if we don't take that step, we will continue in a lot of ways the ideas of our oppressors, because we're never changing what was just given to us.
There is a saying that before you worship a God, he has to look like you, and he also has to be beneficial to you. And nobody's more beneficial who looks like us than us. And so, yes, our history on this planet supersedes Christianity and Islam by millions of years. The question for us today is, why are you going to church? And what's your expectation of the kind of church that you go to? Are you going to a church that is dealing with prosperity, and that is a prosperity religion of prosperity? Or are you going to a church that has a tradition that deals with liberation? You know, what is it that this church is supposed to do for you, for us as a people? And yes, we have tried our best to construct a reality that is beneficial to us. So when you go to, say, Brazil, to Salvador da Bahia, which is the black state of Brazil, more black folks were taken to Brazil than were brought to the United States in terms of during the period of slavery. But when you go there, they have constructed a religion that is based on a combination of the Yoruba religion and Catholicism. It's the Candomblé. And so that they could continue to worship their gods, they propped them up as saints within the context of Christianity, but they could still worship. Now, that having been said, when they went to church with their masters, they had to sit out back in the pens with the cows and the animals and listen over a speaker. That's the reality of the original church that we came up through. But I hope and I think that the majority of us tried to grab those things that would try to make us whole, and we tried to keep on to that which would help us, and tried to get rid of that which would not.
The only thing I'll add to this conversation about religious institutions and Black culture is that there are some specific churches, such as the AME churches, right, that have created a culture around Black liberation. And I think it's best for people who are Black and Christian to do their research on the churches and the specific denomination, that they are a part of, to just get a better understanding of how Black people were supported or treated by that entity. And we know that there are some churches, such as the Catholic Church, I believe, they sold slaves, right? Like, I think it's at Georgetown University, where there is, they sold slaves to Georgetown University for them to build the university. And so, we have to do that unpacking there, right? Because some of these institutions are definitely complicit in our oppression, in very explicit ways, in subtle ways, like you pointed out with the gloves and how, you know, Black servants were treated in the churches. But I think it's best for people to do their research to find out, and also explore how is your church a part of Black liberation today, not just in the past, but like right now at this moment. I know for a fact there's a coalition. It's called National Coalitions of Churches for Reparations, you know, and they're focused on liberation for Black people today.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that, you know, with spirituality and religion, some of this is really a part of us. And if you watch the PBS documentary, and definitely, you know, read and do research, but one thing that struck me was, you know, our tradition of shouting and stuff and dance, you know, that's very much a part of who we are. And, you know, as an ancestral tradition. Also, it's a part of our ancestral tradition to pour out libations. And, you know, when somebody passes away, I mean, you could find it here in Chicago. You're going to see libations being poured out in bottles and things like that. And that is actually a part of ancestral tradition. We don't know where these things come from. We think it's just, you know, like a hood ritual. But then all of a sudden, when you read and you do research, you learn that there's like ancestral ties to some of these things that we do. So yeah, so I'm very much interested in this next, you know, this next century of unpacking those things in religion and being able to distill, you know, what came from oppression, what came from, you know, our ancestors. That's something that I'm definitely working through right now. Thank you so much for your thoughts. We have just a couple of moments left. I want to pause and take some questions from the audience. Those of you who have been listening, if you have questions, comments. I see, Quinn, you said that we should not question Christianity, but more so question how anything can be used to champion whiteness. I mean, I will push back on you. Why can't we question Christianity? You know, my dad is a pastor, and I think us as Black Christians, we are taught, you know, only trust and never doubt. Have faith, never doubt. I've also made a film about Judaism, and it took me about 3 years to make that film at my previous company with my boss who was Jewish. But in those settings, they have Torah studies, and they're taught to question. They're taught to question everything that they learn. And I feel like there are many ways that we are indoctrinated to not ask questions, to just accept whatever we are told. But when it comes down to Christianity, and of course, being a PK, I know that depending on what church you go to, you can get a completely different doctrine. And it really depends on who is instructing you. So I think that we definitely need to be questioning everything that we've been taught. We need to be reading and critiquing and questioning the Bible, because at the end of the day, the Bible is a book that was made curated at a certain time. And we need to be understanding the origin of these texts and deciding, you know, what is for us, what's not for us. Like, I don't understand why we can't question. Do you all have thoughts on like questioning religion?
Well, I personally think we ought to question everything.
Right. Yeah.
I question this country means that we shouldn't let anything go unquestioned. The fact is that there are some things that we are told that are, you know, historic or that are passed down that don't make any sense at all. So you still do it? You know, if somebody says to you, well, the old people said, you know, go out in the snow and eat it during the wintertime because that'll keep you from getting the cold. Do you just do it or do you question it? Mm-hmm. We have an obligation to restore ourselves to a level of intellectual sanity that is based on our looking at the relevance of what is put in front of us.
I actually want to add something here. I think what Quinn was trying to get at with this statement is we're speaking to something that has already been so embedded in us. And I think that there is some not some beauty, but there is some comfort in that. And I think that's what we need to get away from.
But what if you find out that you really have been celebrating the devil? That picture that was in all of our houses was technically the devil and not Jesus.
I don't think that. I don't think that. So like, I'm gonna get personal here. So I was raised Christian. My mother raised me at CME, which is Christian Methodist Episcopal, which is an offset of AME. So right, so I kind of had a little bit of both. We celebrated a lot of our Black culture. My church was all Black. Shout out Carter Temple CME. If anyone is from there, I'm here with you. But anyway, we had both of those balances, and I think the point is that I think we should focus on is not just looking at Christianity. It's every religion, right? Why have people the highest rate of people who believe in a God and also identify as Christian? I think we should take a step back from, okay, Christianity is bad because it's embedded into our culture, whether it was forced or taken on voluntarily. But instead of questioning that, we need to go into, okay, well, this is a part of us. Well, we need to figure out how do we now shift this to a less oppressive, more progressive way to celebrate ourselves. So yeah. But
do we believe that Christians live longer than anybody else?
I ain't saying all that. I'm not saying all of that. I'm not saying all of that also. And
technically, primitive people do.
I'm also drop a gem on you and leave or be devil's advocate is, what about combining modern day religion with spirituality? Because that's also been a pathway for liberation that I've seen a lot of people in my age group taking. We still believe in God. We still celebrate a God, but we understand that there are things in the spiritual realm that we need to acknowledge and understand as well, because they lead into a direct correlation of that diaspora that we have been taken away from.
I just want to add that I'm a part of, in addition to the Black Remembrance Project, I'm a part of a group called the Black Culture Collective it was championed by TJ Crawford, and he does Black Culture Week, which is it's a nod towards Kwanzaa, and it happens around the week of Juneteenth. So we use the Kwanzaa principles and we reintroduce them during Juneteenth. And I bring up the Black Culture Collective because we're trying to use a space of Juneteenth and Black culture to really question what a part of our culture that we've grown up with, what serves us and what doesn't serve us, and what do we want to add to our culture for future generations, right? How are we using our collective wisdom, our collective experiences, our art, our music, our storytelling? How are we using that to rebuild or repair, our people? And religion, all of these things are, they're a construct, and we can alter these constructs to serve us. We can change them to mend where we are today. And so I'm very interested in just in looking at how can Black culture serve Black people today and help to liberate us, because I don't think that our culture has been, I don't think we've been active in trying to always change our culture. I know that Kwanzaa is a new creation, and that's a part of us trying to instill some values, and so is Black History Month. But I'm interested in like us millennials, right? Like, what do we want to add to our culture? Those are some of the things that I want to contribute to the conversation. And so I'm curious to know, like, in terms of Mr. Rami, and am I saying your name correctly? Is it Mr.
Rami? But
I'm sorry, Mr. Rami.
Uh-huh.
What do you want to contribute to the culture? What have you contributed to the culture?
Before you answer that, Mr. Rami, I just want to clarify for a second. When I say question, and when we were talking about questioning religion, I wasn't saying that in a bad or derogatory way. I'm saying that out of sheer curiosity and in seeking knowledge. And a lot of times in our church settings, or when we inherit traditions, we are not taught to question them. We are taught to merely just do them. And that's how we end up in a situation where the folks on the usher board are carrying down this tradition that is coming from oppression, rather than, being informed about what they're doing. So that's what I'm saying, question. But yeah, go ahead, Mr. Rami. What do you feel?
To simply answer your question, I've been in this game for a long time. So I'd have to go each generation to talk about what my contributions have been. But from creating Black theaters to creating films, to creating curriculums, to creating education projects, to mentoring over 800 young people. So that has been my contribution on a continuous basis. However, what I say to millennials, and because it's you all's time, it's your time to take, the championship and the rings and run forward. Can you envision a future extraneous of white people? And I'm not saying that we should get rid of them, but what I'm saying is that if we cannot look at a future in terms of what Black people are as an independent construct of what we ought to be socially, economically, how we ought to dress, what we ought to wear, what our culture is, what the aesthetics are, then we are doing ourselves a disservice, because we're in a position where the majority of us want to be accepted and don't want to be successful. Because we can be successful within our own sake, within our own scope, within our own communities as we were in the past. But instead, we have been psychologically moved into the notion that we have to spread out and share with everybody rather than saving our children. Because as it is stated, the health of a nation is delivered by a look at the situation that the children are in. And when you look at where our children are, we're in trouble. So we have to create a world where it's okay to understand and to love yourself, to love your Blackness, and to reconnect with your historic DNA. So.
All right, folks in the audience, any questions? I want to hear from y'all about cultural practices, how they get passed down. I know things got a little bit spicy in the comments because we're talking about religion, but a lot of cultural practices are passed down through religion. So, and whether we want to admit it or not, Christianity is the dominant religion. It's woven into the fabric of this nation. That's why it's like in our calendar that we get certain dates off because of Christianity. We don't acknowledge everybody's religion, we acknowledge that one. So that's why I framed the question in that way. But yeah, questions, please.
Anthony has a really great question in the chat. He says, I think a lot of things in Black culture have already been outsourced. What do we do to work to what do we work to take back or leave behind? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, can I get started with this one? Actually, I think this is such a great question. I think that's been one of our setbacks as a culture in itself, because we don't know where to start, right? We had this really vibrant example given by people in a generation or two above us, and how we are who we are as people, right? Here we have the birth of the Pan-African movement. Here we have the birth of so many the Pan-African flag, right? We have legends, giants like James Baldwin and June Jordan, like all of these people. And now we have to figure out, okay, how do we not fill these footsteps, but also keep pushing us forward? And I think that is really the first step. Is we have to figure out what do we want as a generation and as a culture of Black people now, and then how do we want to transform this world, right? I know many Black liberators who are continuing to build their identity because they want to change this world, and I think that's the first step. You have to understand your own identity and what shapes it and creates it to begin to push that identity into the world to transform it. So.
And in there lies an issue of reconnection. So, we talk about what we give up and how things have been taken. But the reality is that if you look at us as a people, we're a creative people. And historically, we only dealt with things that were part of the cultural reality. So, for example, when we sang religious, spiritual music, that's because we needed it. When we sang the blues, it was because we were blue. When we were no longer blue, we got rid of it. When jazz came about as a result of our beginning to be free. And so we have constantly changed because our general nature is that art is part of our life force. It is not a commodity to sell, even though we sell it, but it is spiritually part of what we are, which is why we respond to things the way that we do. And so to answer your question, we will always create. Black people have always create everything. You know, we'll throw something away. They took music out of the schools and we created rap for real. You know, so part of it is how we continue to create the things that will keep pushing us forward. And it don't matter what they take, because we can always come up with something else. But we have to stop giving it away. There should be a black tax on everything that people take from us.
I agree with that. And I just want to add to this comment in terms of the future and what do we want to bring and take back. I think with this internet technology, with the COVID pandemic, I think there's a lot of disconnection. I know that like my nieces and nephews don't get to go out and play like we used to play. You know, the togetherness or just tangibly being in the same space with each other is something that I think after this pandemic starts to settle down, like I hope to see more of that. And I bet the music is going to be different to the point about blues and us not even. I hope to see a more livelier, vibrant Black community. But I definitely think we need deeper connections in this time. And I mean, when we think about what's been happening after Trump, right? Like there's a lot of unsettled feelings around racism in this country. And I think that our culture has been responding with protests in the street to police brutality. And one of the reasons why I decided to lift up Juneteenth is because I felt awful just going to protests only to talk, to depict Black death, right? I wanted time and space to celebrate us and where we are. Not to say that those things and those protests don't matter, but I think we need to come into something else, a different type of togetherness that's not around just despair.
That's so true. And when I look at our coverage of Juneteenth and the photos that come out of that, the colorfulness of those celebrations, the dancing of those celebrations, that all to me looks like a continuation of, again, our ancestral lineage. When we're talking about taking back what things that we're going to take back, I know for the tribe, we are taking back the narrative. We are saying we are specifically writing for the Black gaze. So a lot of times we are taking people who have come out of journalism school and saying, take off your code switch, talk like you would be talking to your mama or your cousin or, you know, whoever, when you report this article. And because we are institutionalized in a way where we are trained to appeal to the masses, to appeal to the dominant, you know, culture. So one thing as a tribe that we are really focused on is Black narratives, raising our level of consciousness and doing it for us and not for the eyes of everybody else. So Anthony, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. And it looks like that's our time, y'all. Wow, this was nourishing. Thank you so much for being here once again. Mr. Rami, Professor Pratt, LaCreshia Birts. I really, really enjoyed you. Everybody, thank you for tuning in to TRiiBE Tuesday. This is our monthly panel series where we come together in community, because that's what we do as Black people. We come together, we tell stories, we pass on traditions. I am the co-founder and creative director of the TRiiBE. Please stay connected with me. You can email info@thetribe.com or connect@thetribe.com if you want to partner with us. But everybody, thank you so much and have a good night. Stay safe in this pandemic, everybody. Before I go, do you all want to tell us how we can follow you and stay in touch, or any projects we should look out for? Professor Pratt, go ahead.
I'm not doing much right now. You can definitely follow me on social medias. _ Professor Pratt. You can read some of my work online. You can just type in my name on Google and read some of my literature work. And I'm more than happy to discuss anything about Blackness, right? So go ahead and follow me. Feel free to reach out if you ever have any further questions. And thanks for having me.
I feel like we're going to need a part 2 of this conversation. So we might be hitting you back up. LaCreshia, let us know how we can follow you and what you're working on next.
You can definitely follow me on social media at LaCreshia Birts on Facebook, and also follow the Black Remembrance page. We will be coming out with a Chicago Juneteenth planning committee, and so if you're interested, you can hit us up. But I say hit us up on the Black Remembrance Twitter. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Rami, close us out. How can we follow you and keep in tune?
Facebook, Twitter, Google. This coming Saturday, we're doing a panel centered around The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And we're talking about that film, which I happen to not only be in as an actor, but was also the casting director for. So we're going to have a really interesting discussion about that this weekend. And once again, I just want to thank all of you for allowing me to sit here with you and share some words and appreciate the opportunity. And I look forward to us doing it again.
All right. Stay safe, family. Good night.
Good night.
Night.